There was one audience question you didn't get to, is how to get unstuck if you feel stuck.
Mood follows action.
Do something.
When you feel stuck, you don't feel like doing anything different. But the only way to get unstuck is to... Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Roll On. Subscribe on YouTube. Go to the places.
Yeah.
Hit the buttons.
The likes.
Do the thing.
Subscribe.
Leave your thoughts.
Yeah, leave comments.
Is that what you do? Is that what the little kids
comments
do?
Here.
Young people?
Little kids. If you're on the internet,
we're
in
ending.
class.
I'm getting out before it completely capsizes. Mr. Skolnick, welcome back to a much delayed return to the beloved Roll On.
I couldn't be happier to be here. Thanks for having me, man. This is it's an honor to be in, not just back, but in this space.
So we are recording from a brand new space. For those that are watching on YouTube, hopefully it looks exactly the same, but we have relocated to a new space. That space is an unfolding story that we will be, telling at a future date. I don't want to go too much into it, but we have moved into a new headquarters for the purposes of housing our burgeoning and quickly growing Voicing Change Media network of podcast partners with multiple studios, so we can house other creators and kind of have this collaborative community, which is really exciting. So we're in the midst of honing in on the final details of completing it. Once that's done, we'll definitely be talking more about it. I'm sure we'll do like a video tour of the whole thing, and it's going to allow us to kind of up-level not only the kind of creative aspect of this show by creating, kind of ancillary types of content, but also content around all of our partners who are coming in and out. It's been wild because now that we have other shows recording here, I'll come to the studio, and like, oh, hey, there's Abby Wambach, in the lot. Like, what are you doing? It's like wild, right? Like,
yes.
It's very cool. I'm super excited about it. And like I said, more will be revealed. But welcome. This is the very first podcast episode of the RRP that is being recorded in the new space. The other creators have been here for a while, but we took our time moving our set over. And so this is the virgin episode. And I couldn't think of anyone better to kind of celebrate that than with you, my friend.
Oh, man. Thank you. It's like I said, it's an honor. I'm stoked to be here. It's really exciting to see what's happening with the network and all the different collaborators that are involved. And, I'm working on a little something.
I know.
Yeah.
Maybe zip it for now. Create a little anticipation. You're a storyteller.
I'm a storyteller. Something might turn up.
Build anticipation in the way that White Lotus seems very intent upon building anticipation
yes.
by literally this incredibly slow boil where it seems like nothing is happening.
Yes.
It's coming, and it's like we're going to go through another episode with not that much happening. Anyway, we'll talk about that
I'm
later.
literally mimicking that slow boil with this project.
All right. We also put out the call for some audience questions. We got a bunch. They kind of rotated on themes, but I thought what we would do is sort of answer them, not at the end, but kind of throughout the conversation because they kind of dovetail nicely with the topics that we wanted to cover today. But one of them was, why don't we do Roll On more frequently, Adam?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Why not?
I don't know. I think, first of all, I would say that the idea for Roll On was twofold originally. One was to kind of provide an opportunity for me as the host to like share more of my thoughts because it's always so guest oriented. And I'm not so great at like doing it alone, looking to camera. I wanted somebody to spar with, and you have turned out to be the perfect person to do that with. And then secondly, because it seemed like an easier lift than all the prep that goes into the guests.
Yes.
It turns out it takes just about the same amount of prep in order to, kind of do it well. You know what I mean? I find at least maybe I don't need to prep as much for it as I do, but I end up doing that the same. And so maybe we haven't done it as much because it didn't alleviate that kind of first need of being an easier lift, but also because they have to be kind of timely and of the moment. And with our production schedule, and we work way ahead. And now I'm in the midst of working on this book and we're batching stuff. And so we've had that experience of recording a roll-on like a couple weeks before it goes up. And then because the news, moves increasingly faster and faster, the things that we talk about are kind of stale by the time it comes out. So this one we're recording on Monday, it's going up on Thursday. That's about as tight of a post-production cycle as we can manage at this point. But it's a good question. And the fans have spoken. I think the fans of Roll-On might be smaller, fewer than, the larger podcast audience at large, but they're very passionate.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I'm constantly getting pinged by people like, when's Roll-On? Like, enough of this bullshit with the guests. Like, we need our Roll-On. And then, of course, we've got Chris Evans over in the UK.
Hello,
who's
Chris.
Constantly, saying like, get back on the Roll-On. You should just be doing Roll-On every day.
Well, some people who love Roll-On, that's like their favorite podcast. So it's like as if their podcast went off. But also, I think when Roll-On first happened, it was also a response to the fact that it was hard to do a show during the pandemic, because it was hard to get people in, and there was a whole protocol around that you hadn't mastered yet.
That's true.
And so we were doing it twice a month, and that's probably too much because, unless you're changing the whole format of your show, which you didn't want to do, and you shouldn't. But yeah, like, every so often, it's like comforting for people. They want to hear.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little shit. It's a little unfiltered, and it's a more relaxed version of me than the kind of sphincter clenched version of me that shows up when I have to sit across from somebody impressive and pretend like I know what they're talking about.
I'm going to take that as a compliment. But also the difference though is when you're talking to an Adam Grant or someone like that, there's only so much of yourself that you're sharing, because you're mostly there to prop up your guest and to like explore their lives and what they have to say. And so this is an opportunity, I think, for your listeners to hear from you. And so that's probably why people like it the most.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
A second question was, do we spend time together off mic?
Not enough.
Not enough. There's a bit of a bromance that goes on off mic, though. I wish I spent more time with you off mic. We do talk a lot, but it's not like you're coming over for Sunday brunch and stuff like that. But maybe we could rectify that.
I don't go anywhere, bro.
I don't either. That's the thing. I don't hang out with anyone.
No, I've got a 4.5-year-old. My margins are small. Like my margins are to the point where I exercise them for exercise. Like my margins are tight. So like I'm not going to cash in like a night out with people, like with the boys for like a run. I just don't. Right. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. So I had this conversation with a buddy of mine who invited me out, and he goes, and he's got older kids, and he said, I forget what it's like to have a kid under 5. You're right. There's a lot of staying home, and he was saying it as kind of. Not like he thought it was negative, but just that like you miss out. And I think two things for me, I had Zuma late. We had Zuma late enough where I don't have any of the FOMO. Like I did a lot of stuff. Like I was all over the world. I was out a lot. I did all that, and I don't have it. And the second is I just like it. I like being home. I like practicing my guitar and going to bed early and watching stuff and reading. I actually like it.
The comforts of the middle-aged man.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. Yeah,
me too. Yeah. Also, for people that aren't super familiar with the topography of Los Angeles,
right,
like I happen to live, out in the middle of nowhere. This studio is quite far away from most things that people would consider Los Angeles proper. You live in Santa Monica, and the drive from like here or my house to where you live ordinarily wouldn't be that bad, maybe 45 minutes.
No traffic.
But now the Pacific Coast Highway is closed due to the LA fires. It's still closed. And so without that, you have to go all the way around 101 to the 405, and you're looking at like an hour and 15. I mean, how long did it take you to get here today?
Today was okay. It was like 45 minutes because it's a weekday and you don't have the beach traffic, and it's a little off the time. I forgot I was going to bring my press pass to get through the checkpoints in case I wanted to go home. PCH, because I've done that a couple of times where I've driven through and you just have to have a press pass and they just let you through. And I've done it for work. I haven't done it. Well, one time I did it for work, but also to beat traffic to come out here for that. for that year, like that.
Well, it's a worthy, use of your press pass. You are on your way to a press event.
Yes. And so I went through, but it's devastating. It's still devastating, and the fact that PCH is still not open just shows you what we're dealing with, and it's not open anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what that's like to see it up close and up front like that. That's an experience I haven't had yet. And I'll preface that question by saying that although our home was incredibly proximate to the northwest edge of the fire, it was arrested like on the ridge line just shy of our little neighborhood. We were evacuated for 9 days. We went up to Ojai. And because we were out of town, and when we were able to finally get back into our house, the PCH being closed and all these roads being closed, I actually have yet to even see with my own eyes any evidence of the burn. Like, my entire experience of the fire has been like everyone else, on Instagram, seeing videos, or on the phone talking to friends who lost their homes or were kind of like right there. I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with people. I was at the retail store on Abercrombie in Venice, like handing out apparel and shoes in the aftermath of the fire to like all these people who, had lost everything. So I feel connected to it in that regard. I just haven't like seen it, and I haven't been on PCH, which is weird and deranging. Like, it's all around us.
Yeah. But I think that's common. I think most people's experience of it, unless they've gone out and sought the views or have the access, most people have seen it on television or on Instagram. A lot of like drone footage or that chopper footage. I saw like, I can't remember exactly. It was probably the end, like in January when he had that dinner, like later January is when my first time I drove through it in the Palisades section.
That was the time we hung out.
Yeah.
Off mic.
Yeah, no, it happens. Yeah. We get in the water sometimes. It's
been a while since we've done that.
It exists. Yeah. But the Alphabet Streets in the Palisades just completely wiped out, like a whole plateau of homes. And, we don't have to go too deep into it. Everyone knows what happened. But it's good. The things that have kind of stuck with me is that it was such an organism, that fire, to start from like that burn scar, from the New Year's Eve burn scar, and just explode. And then it goes wanders all the way to Mandeville, all the way out by you. This is what, how many miles? Like, this is like 40 miles or something like that, just from point to point. That's how far that fire spread before it was even close to contained in any way. Just one of those crazy, nuclear storms.
So when you're driving on PCH and seeing it, what is that like?
Going through the Palisades, it's more like a neighborhoods that are completely wiped out. So I've been in displaced people's camps. I've talked to people who've been victims of war and have had to flee, and many refugees. But I've never actually been to a site like I saw in the Palisades where a neighborhood was erased. I've been to the aftermath where I saw people who have left villages that were torched, but I've never seen it. Like, I've never been in it. So it was very post-apocalyptic. It was windy. The chains were rattling. The fire department was still around. The National Guard was still manning the checkpoints, and I think they probably still are. But so it was pretty early on to be there. But it wasn't like during the firefight. And so that was so overwhelming. And then coming down towards PCH, Zuma's school is Westside Waldorf, and their main campus was on Sunset, just inland from PCH. And that I thought it was completely burned down because that was the intel we were getting, but it was like half burnt. And that campus is owned by Self-Realization Fellowship, so they were renting that space. So they're not going to go back to that space. Yeah. I mean, it is burnt to the point where they can't. It's like an unsalvageable situation. Luckily, Zuma's school's in Santa Monica. Now all the kids are on that one little campus in Santa Monica, which was originally a satellite campus. So I was so consumed by this feeling of a post-apocalyptic doom, and then checking out Zuma's campus, that by the time I got to PCH, it's overwhelming because you see it house after house burn, but it doesn't hit you to the same way as if you're surrounded by it, because it's still on the flank of PCH. So it didn't really hit. And then just Wednesday, I was out on a boat. I was helping a photographer friend of mine, Glenna Gordon, who shoots for the New York Times Magazine sometimes, and she and I worked together in the past. She's trying to do something on the fire's long-term impact on the coast, and so through our friend Kyle Tierman, you're my friend, I got hooked up with a buddy of his, and he took us out on a boat, and so she could get in the water and do some over-under shots. And so I was the first time I've been in the Santa Monica Bay since the fires, which is so abnormal for me. Like, and the water quality is something we've all been very concerned about, and air quality, but the water looked and felt the same as it would in March anytime. It was 53 degrees. It looked very green algae, but not scary contaminated or anything. And then it hit me harder that way because I was looking at the whole coastline of the houses where you'd normally see it, and it was just gone and bald mountains behind. So that's my feeling of it. But for me, for our family, we evacuated the first night, that Tuesday night, because it was coming closer and closer, and we were voluntary evacuated. And then I came back the next day. And the funny thing for me was I had rolled my ankle on a trail run on New Year's Day, and so I was in a boot, hobbling around on a boot, getting the family out, and then coming back and like clearing brush in my boot. And it turned out I had a fracture in my fibula. So I'm like just scraping by. It was one of those comedies of errors while we're just like doom is taking place. So it was this very weird, surreal beginning of 2025. And that doesn't seem like it has ended.
Yeah.
It's a weird dream.
It's a lot, man. We went up to Ojai.
Yeah.
As soon as we arrived, we went to, there was a little farmer's market. There's like a field there, and I guess it takes place once a week. We've got some friends up there, and a friend of ours let us use a house that they owned that was sort of like vacant or whatever. Didn't even have any furniture, so we were sleeping on like air mattresses. But we go to this farmer's market, and I kid you not, like within 10 to 15 minutes, I run into Pete Holmes and Rob Bell. Like that is sort of like the, podcasting annex of, like those guys moved up there. Both of them
they live there. Rob Bell's up there now?
They both live there.
Okay.
Both friends of the pod, friends. There's got to be a better term than friends of the pod. How about pod champions?
Oh.
Yeah.
Pod pals?
Pod champions.
Pod pals?
Rob Bell and...
Pod punks?
No. We'll work on it.
Okay.
Put your literary mind to work on that. You could do better. You could do better.
Is weak.
Anyway, there's a real sense of community up there. Yeah. I liked it up there. I had a good time. But my intuition, my take is that all of these predictions around rebuilding are wild underestimates. I think it's going to be like 10 years before things feel like they're back to some kind of, proximate level to what they were before. And all these people that are looking at rebuilding, are I think most of them are going to pull up sticks and move somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe.
Somewhere else. Like the prospect of rebuilding, like waiting that long. So we're already seeing a lot of real estate sales, a lot of commercial real estate developers picking up these, lots,
for cash,
aggregating them, and you're going to just see they can wait it out, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll just build spec homes and, sell them at above market prices.
Yeah, because the undertold thing about the Palisades especially, but also Malibu, is that, these places weren't like ritzy places, and even as recently as the 80s, certainly there were some wealthy people that lived there, but it was also places where teachers lived, and in Palisades' case, it was kind of aerospace workers.
Right.
It was the base of that population, and so there's people that have lived there. They're in their 90s. They're not rebuilding, and then after Wolseley, my understanding, you know better than me, that a lot of fire insurance premiums spiked. So people might have been carrying fire insurance, and then all of a sudden they couldn't carry it to the same level. And so people are underinsured. A lot of people are underinsured, and so It's interesting. Like, one of the takeaways for me is that nowhere's really safe anymore. Like, nowhere's like, because if you go to the Palisades, sure, they've been evacuated before, but it feels like a neighborhood. Like, even my neighborhood is even further from the Santa Monica Mountains. And we weren't that far. Like it went to voluntary evacuation on that first night, and we were 2 miles from flames. And so you could see it could have happened. Like even there, it could have happened. So there's no place you can really run to, especially if you like to interface with nature in this climate. So it's just, we're going to have to deal with that existential threat and like how we deal with that and you know, make the best of it, because that's kind of the era we're in. I think that's my takeaway, not to be doom and gloom, because I don't mean it that way. It just means, it just does seem that we're in this new era where you can't, you know, these once in a generation storms that never happen, the 100-year storms, they do happen now, and they happen more
with regularity.
Yeah, maybe every 25 years.
Yeah. It's an opportunity to engage with uncertainty.
It is.
You know?
It is.
Life is fundamentally uncertain. As much as we would like to, believe it not to be the case.
Yeah.
This is what Ellen Langer was talking about on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's uncertain, and we're actually terrible at making predictions, even though we think we're good at it.
Right.
And the more that we can have a healthy relationship with uncertainty, the kind of more grounded and less anxious, I guess we can be. And here we are with this opportunity to engage with a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the century that is 2025.
Yeah, it's quite a century so far.
I know. We're going to get to that. I did want to hit on a few things.
Yes.
We got to keep this moving because we have so many things to cover in the outline.
100%.
I went to my first South by Southwest. What was that? Feels like months ago, but I think it was only like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Did a panel with the great Baratunde Thurston on why conversation matters. But despite always having wanted to attend this festival, I'd never gone before, and I was really impressed. Like, it felt like I'd heard that it kind of waned, and maybe that's COVID oriented, but it felt like it was firing on all cylinders. Like,
amazing.
It was, so many things going on in that city. It was almost impossible to get your hands around like what to go see and what not to see. All these events competing with each other. Of course, I know you dug into the history a little bit. It was historically music, and then independent film, and then tech kind of became a big piece of it. But I can tell you, this year, it was insane how much of it was about podcasting. There were just dozens of panels on podcasting. There were all these live podcasts happening. And Spotify and iHeart and these big networks took over hotels or spaces to throw big parties and gatherings. And it was just super weird and interesting to reflect upon like the early days of doing this and realize like how far this form of media has come.
Wild. Yeah, I mean, even so, the quick backstory, South by, for those who don't know it, it started in 87, 700 attendees, just a music festival. I mean, a cool music festival, because at this time, Austin was still, in the weird stage. It wasn't kind of on the, I guess it was known, but it was mostly known as an arty town, a music town, slacker town. And then by 2018, it was 161,000 attendees for the music festival. Or for the total festival. In film and multimedia launched in 94, 95. Film split from multimedia. Multimedia was renamed Interactive in 99. And now, if you look at like the music festival part of it, I looked at kind of the lineups. It wasn't big bands. Like, it wasn't too long ago, like in 2018, it was really big acts that were still going there. And this year, kind of like, that part seems to be dialed way down to like the 80s days, like these interesting indie weird bands that might be great, but just not the same level of like Coachella level of headlining acts. And now it's the podcasters that have kind of become the rock stars of the event, huh?
Well, I think the bigger acts also are appearing in part of the kind of branding exercise around like the sponsors of the event. Like St. Vincent played at the Rivian party, so there's, but that's not really part of the festival aspect of it. That's more like, kind of marketing and branding.
Yeah. So it's just matured,
the bands
and got
are
a
there,
corporate
but
job.
they're not like in the white hot spotlight of like what the festival is had traditionally been about.
No. How does it feel for you, like as a podcaster, starting in the wilderness, where you had to explain what a podcast is, probably to everybody you knew?
It's great. It's dizzying. It's both like gratifying, but also you're like, oh man, like now we're part of the, kind of, industrial complex of media in a way that this was supposed to be kind of like the Radio Free Europe version of, But I'm I mean, look, I'm super grateful to be in this incredibly privileged position where what we're doing is successful and has an audience. Like, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to start something like this now, where there's so much competition, and it's much more. If you want to do video, it's much more like cost intensive. When I started, there was no competition and zero barrier to entry, and video wasn't even a thing, and so it was easy to get this thing up on its feet and cultivate an audience and distinguish it from everything else out there, because nobody was really doing very much at the time.
Right.
And that's certainly not the case now. And now you have to have a strategy, and you have to know you have to have kind of like a conceit, and a value proposition. And there's all this, kind of intensity that goes into how you launch a show. Like, I didn't launch a show. I just uploaded an episode and said, that was fun. Let's do it tomorrow, kind of thing. And like, those days are gone,
Right.
But it was cool to go there. Like, Mark Maron did a thing. I went to go see him speak. I didn't go to the Spotify party. I should, but like, all these creators were there. And
Simmons and Maron and you and Rogan, these are some of the early names, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't like first. I mean, Maron was doing it before me by a couple of years. Simmons was, there were people around. I mean, Rogan had started, Adam Carolla, like a lot of comedians, right? Yeah. But it just wasn't, the landscape it is now. But interestingly, one of the things that happened when I was there was the launch of Michelle Obama's podcast with her brother, Craig Robinson. It's called IMO. And I had the opportunity to kind of attend this intimate gathering at the Rivian House to celebrate that launch. So Michelle Obama was there, Craig Robinson was there, and they kind of came out and like talked about their show. They had just recorded an episode with RJ Scaringe, the founder and CEO of Rivian. People who watch or listen to this show know he was on our show recently. And it's just it's like, oh, Michelle Obama is here. Like, she's launching a podcast, So that was really cool. She split as soon as she kind of got out and said a few words, but Craig Robinson hung around and I got a chance to talk to him for a little bit, which is cool. Yeah. So Michelle Obama hosting a podcast, I would say that the medium has come a long way.
It might do well, that show.
Yeah, I think they're gonna do all right. Yeah.
do okay. Yes, the medium has matured. The corporate people are involved. It's not just South by. Like, people are selling out arenas to do their like live shows. Like, you remember there was that
Acquired.
Exactly.
Acquired. So speaking of Acquired, those guys do an amazing work. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, or just high performance in general, or what makes successful people successful, like, those guys are extraordinary at what they do, and they've developed an incredible following, and they're doing arenas, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually just listened to one of those episodes last week, because right after South by Southwest, I had a speaking gig in Tucson at an event called People for Bikes, which is sort of a bike industry gathering. Right. And part of that speaking opportunity involved me interviewing Jim Weber on stage, who is the former CEO of Brooks Running. Okay. And he had been the guest on Acquired at one of their giant auditorium shows. So I listened to that to prepare for this conversation. And once again, was not disappointed at what a good job those guys do. Yeah. But Jim Weber was super interesting, very friendly, affable guy who came into Brooks in 2001 when it was a distressed asset. I think they had, can't remember what their revenue was, maybe it might have been something like 60 million, but I think they were something like $20 or $40 million in debt. They were losing $5 million a year. They were teetering on bankruptcy, and he was the fourth CEO in 2 years, brought in to try to turn this thing around. Everyone else had failed. And in a couple of years, he did turn it around. And ultimately, it blossomed into a $1 billion plus brand under his stewardship. So he's like this sort of like really dynamic leader who also in 2017 got diagnosed with esophageal cancer and continued to like steward Brooks. He only recently stepped down like this past year. Wow. But it became a independently, like wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. So he has all these stories about, working with Warren Buffett, who he had always been obsessed with and stuff like that. He's a cool dude. Yeah.
Warren might be my favorite billionaire of all my billionaire baseball cards I got at home. I've got a whole, you know me.
You do.
I've got a whole altar to the billionaires, and Warren is now at the top of my, I've had to demote some. I've had to demote a few of them. Yeah. I want Zuma to know who the billionaires are.
You do. Well, we do have an obsession with billionaires in our culture, for better or worse. God. Probably mostly for worse.
Yeah, for worse. I think. Long ago, I thought billionaires should be banned because you should be able to get by with $999 million. So, like, at $1 billion, like I had this whole.
But how would you ban them?
Well, so
what does that mean? I'm not down with that.
All right.
If you can figure out how to make $1 billion, you should be able to do that. But I do think, if you are so lucky, so fortunate, so resilient or whatever to accumulate that much wealth, doesn't it come with a little bit of responsibility to give back?
Right. So my whole thing was predicated on, like, when Eisenhower was in office, something like people in the top tax bracket, after you earned a certain amount, like you had to pay like almost 90% in taxes. It was crazy. I hate taxes too. No one likes to pay taxes. I understand even billionaires don't want to pay taxes. They think they can do a better job with their money. Helping people probably is the narrative in their head, I'm guessing. But not having $1 billion, I don't really know. But I did have this whole idea for my presidential platform, which was eliminate billionaires. If you make, once you get to a certain amount of net worth, it's 100%. You can still do your job, still enjoy the job, but it's 100% taxed. And then
you work for the government then.
Well, or you can, maybe there's a way to use that entrepreneurial spirit as a way to solve some problems like our infrastructure. Instead of just complaining, you have to actually solve one of the problems we have. And then my other thing, the conservatives could get around this. The second prong of my platform was you can no longer pass laws. You can only repeal laws. That was my second thing. So first you tax the anti-billionaire tax, then you stop passing laws. You just repeal the laws that you don't want. And that was my two-pronged platform. And then once that was in place, I would resign. So like that was all I was going to do. Like that was my whole. But now we have Doge, which is kind of like the worst version of that idea.
It does channel a little bit of that spirit.
Yeah, though, a little Doge in there.
You're a light dusting of Doge on your platform. Scolding. Hey everybody, today's episode is brought to you by Seed Gut Health. I talk about it all the time on the podcast. You know it's important. If you've even listened to a few of my podcasts, I think I've maybe devoted, a dozen, 24 episodes to the microbiome. You got to take care of your gut health if you want to have optimal health. How do you do that? Well, your nutrition, your lifestyle habits, sleep, all of these things play into that. But it's also important to find a really good prebiotic and probiotic. How do you do that? Well, there's a lot of nonsense out there, so you got to follow the science. And the best evidence-based product that I found out there is Seed's DSO1 Daily Symbiotic. I've been taking it for, over 3 years at this point, every single day. There's just a tremendous amount of science behind this product. I urge you to check it out. And right now, it's a great time to do that because you can get 25% off your first month of Seed's DSO1 Daily Symbiotic. Hit the link in the description below to visit seed.com/richroll and use code RICHROLL25. Get on it. So Squarespace has been a long time partner of the show, and what I love about it is it just demystifies everything about what's required to make a website. You don't need to be a designer, you don't need to know how to code. Everything is right at your fingertips. They make it super simple, and they've got these unbelievably beautiful templates to choose from that are oriented around whatever your needs may be. Whether you need a simple landing page or a full-on online shop, Snap, Crackle, Pop, Squarespace has the tools you need to launch your business, including e-commerce templates and inventory management. So make that website. You got it. Click the link in the description below for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code RICHROLL to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. But the executive branch doesn't even have the authority to repeal laws.
I know. It's like,
I guess it doesn't matter, right? Does anything matter anymore when it comes to governance?
Maybe not. Maybe that's part
unclear.
That's part of the decade that has been 2025 so far. Is right after the fires, we're dealing with this chaos.
There is quite a bit of chaos.
Yeah, a lot of people asked about it. A lot of people asked about.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
This whole thing.
I'm sort of two minds on this. I get a lot of emails from people and messages saying, thank you for being a sort of safe harbor away from the political discourse that's out there. Like, what I like about your show is I tune in because I need a break from that,
of course.
And the minute the issue of politics is raised, not only is it inflammatory and sort of, kind of alienating for a lot of people, it sort of violates that sort of sacred trust that people have come to rely upon with this show. But at the same time, the countervailing perspective is, what is the point in having a big platform? Like, what is the responsibility that then you hold to kind of speak truth to power and kind of do the right things that use it to do what you think is right and responsible right now. And those two things I feel like are in tension. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but I would say that I guess my way into it is not to, dive into all of the particularities of every issue. There are other people more equipped to do that. But, there's a lot of wild shit going on right now. And for a lot of people, it's destabilizing and it's anxiety producing, and it's confronting us with, again, uncertainty and fear, right? And how do you navigate that? So there were a bunch of questions around like, how do we get through this period of time when it feels like we're dismantling the federal government, or there's this broad expansion of executive branch powers. Judges are being ignored. We've got DOJ doing what DOJ is doing. There's the deportations issue. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. There's, they're seeding the groundwork for a third term. A lot of stuff. And like the news cycle is so insane that you can't help but like get caught up in it, get kind of agitated by the whole thing, depending upon your perspective. And really, the only thing that I feel like I can really speak to and provide value on is like, how do you kind of emotionally regulate throughout all of this? And, look, there's the easy pickings in this, which is like curate your media diet. You don't have to be addicted to the news. You don't have to be up to the minute on every single thing that's happening. Like a lot of this stuff is sort of by design intended to, agitate you and distract you and, distance you from kind of living your life. So I think it's important to just, ground yourself. If you need to remove apps from your phone, do that. Turn off cable news, invest in real life experiences, call up a friend, engage with the people you care about, and exercise a little bit of self-care. And also I think it's important to like know your triggers, either avoid them or find a way to develop resilience so that you're not triggered. You and I were talking about Adam Grant the other day.
Right.
His book, Think Again, he's got this paradigm. Instead of being a prosecutor or a preacher or a politician, you're best to inhabit this kind of mindset of the scientist, which is to approach conflict and ideas from a perspective of open-mindedness and curiosity, like to be kind of excited to find out that you're wrong, or to kind of stress test your ideas, et cetera. And maybe that's a way for people to think about like how they approach difficult conversations or ideas that are getting thrown at them that perhaps they disagree with or find kind of emotionally, charging
or
in
even
a certain regard.
Just to cope with this information that is coming in, even just as a coping mechanism.
Right. Like hold your ideas a little bit loosely.
Right.
We all think we know what's right. Every man is right from his or her perspective.
Right.
And like, maybe we don't know, and is there a way to kind of feel comfort with, receding a little bit further into the background for your own kind of self-emotional preservation?
Yeah. I have this one tried and true tactic whenever things get crazy, and I don't always do it, but I rely on it quite often. show great concern and do nothing. Or don't just do something, sit there.
Yeah, that's the opposite of good advice. Actually, it's sort of like, I think there's a lot of people who get agitated and then you go into like reposting mode or like reply guy stuff.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're doing something. You're not doing anything.
No, you're doing nothing.
You're basically engaging in self-harm. Right. You're not accomplishing anything. So if you do feel compelled to be part of what you might believe to be the solution, then do something towards that end. Like do something actually in the real world that would advance that, idea that you feel is important.
Well, it's such an overwhelm, right? All these things are happening at once, and it's like you said, it's like this dominoes are falling, and we are easily triggered because first of all, it should be said that Elon Musk did do I'm a Jew who loves Nazi movies. We've talked about it I love that I'm a student of that era of history, partly because it was the liberation kind of narrative. But I know a Nazi salute when I see one. So when you see that, it triggers. But when he's not meaning it necessarily in that way, he wants to trigger, right? So when you're dealing with this, like the news is triggering, everything's triggering. But I think it's important to also understand the dissonance that is happening as well, because it's not like everything that's happening is bad, right? But it feels bad because the way it's happening is bad. But I wasn't a fan of RFK necessarily, but he is the first guy that I've heard of in my life that has gone up against the food companies, telling them we don't want this kind of food in our system anymore. He, we were talking about pharmaceutical ads. He's trying to deal with that. Now, all these things aren't necessarily, there are bad things happening, but it's not all bad things. So when you hear about that happening, like RFK thing in particular, you're like, okay, that's interesting. And when you hear about tariffs, well, I remember when, I was an activist when, the WTO protests were happening in Seattle, and everyone was against globalization. All the environmentalists didn't want it. None of the unions wanted globalization. Everyone was saying this is going to be the worst thing ever. And a lot of bad has happened. A lot of good has happened at the same time. But they were trying to pump the brakes on it, and they didn't like it. And now you have an administration who actually is trying to end it in its own weird, wacky way. And so, is it all bad? It is important to take the scientist's approach, is my long way of saying, because not everything is happening is happening because of the way you think. Even that dumb salute, you don't know why it's actually happening. So it's different. That's the dissonance that's crazy. And so I don't think it's bad advice to say, you have to take a beat and you have to tune in with some modalities that are going to help you get through it, because it's going to be never ending. It's going to be one after another after another. And I was saying this to April was kind of stressing about this before Inauguration Day. I went through that in the last administration with Trump, where I was angry the whole time. And I wasn't going to be that. Now I'm the guy that keeps an eye on the news, because I feel like you do have to know. If prisoners are going to psycho prisons in El Salvador, it's crazy. It is crazy. Mm-hmm. By the way, that El Salvadorian president is a crypto bro, and he's got Crypto Beach out there.
I know.
There's all these weird, dissonant,
And they have these super prisons there.
Yeah. And they have them because El Salvador was a gangster state. Normal people couldn't get through the day. That's how bad the gang problem was there. So then this guy comes in, goes super hard line, and now is in with crypto bros and the Trump administration. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is we try to solve a problem, and a problem is solved, but new ones crop up in the most bizarre ways. And that's kind of the weird dark side of evolution, right? Life evolves and things evolve and civilization evolves in ways that are confronting and wrong a lot of times. But we have to live through it. So I guess that's...
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff that is going on, but there's also a lot of talking, and we don't know, when that talking turns into action or not, right? And I think in the context of RFK, to your point, I'm not going to buy into all of his stuff, but the one thing that I can get on board with is his perspective on big food and big pharma. These are topics that have come up, since day one on this podcast.
Yep.
Finally, there's a guy who's got a lot of energy around him, who seems intent upon not only doing something about this, but actually getting people interested in it, right?
Yeah.
Which I think in and of itself is interesting. And that doesn't mean that I'm down with beef tallow or like a lot of his other stances that are very controversial. But here's one for you, and it goes to that topic of like not knowing, right? It's sort of the consequence of unforeseen circumstances that illustrates the difference between like talking a big game and actually governing, whether it's Doge getting in there and dismantling things maybe they shouldn't have that are causing, a bunch of, kind of tangential problems as a result. With RFK going after Big Pharma, I believe he said he wants to make it illegal for Big Pharma to advertise on television. We've all had that experience of watching pharmaceutical ads. They're incessant, especially on like cable news. It's one after the other, where 2/3 of the ad is dedicated to all the side effects. And it's comedic at this point, right? Yep. But those ads sustain mainstream network television, right? Like if you like, I'm totally on board with getting rid of Big Pharma doing ads on television. Yes. I think it's criminal that actually exists. But that is the business model
at this point.
So
at this point,
if suddenly that becomes illegal, like that, there's like, I don't know how, not just like CNN, but like Fox News, Fox News is contingent upon that, like to survive, right? So if that happens, or if that's on the horizon or being threatened, how long before Rupert Murdoch picks up the phone and calls Trump and says, you can't do this?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we got to keep Fox News going. The only way we keep it going is pharma.
Right.
So this is just an example of like when you get into the nuts and bolts of like actually trying to solve a problem or governing, there's all these other factors that come into play that you quickly realize like, oh, this is more difficult than it appears to be.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like that old line, be careful of the unintended consequences of good intentions.
Yeah. That was the one thing I was trying to say.
Yeah. Like even if you're doing something good, and it's the same, it's reversed, the same thing. Like this globalization, and the Clintons were behind globalization, right? That was that whole thing. So, I guess ultimately it's, to me, there's like, it comes down to, are you making the world a little bit kinder or a little bit crueler? Because we're so minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Not to say our actions don't matter, because I do think, we're here once, and this is for all intents and purposes, this is it. And so you got to make it count. But to me, making it count, the ledger is, are you making it a little bit kinder, or are you making it a little bit crueler? Now, some people would think me naive for having that as my ledger, but that is my compass, right? Because like a lot of people would be like, no, it's about efficiency, or get the most you can get, or whatever. I mean, you see it the way our society runs, but to me, it's really basic. It's like kinder or crueler. What are you going to do? And we all have a million chances a day to answer that question in different ways. And it's. I'm not saying you have to choose the kind choice every time, because it's impossible. But that's kind of the needle I'm trying to move in my life. And so you can still do that in this crazy time, in this crazy year. And it's kind of the only way to get through these kind of crazy times, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you're struggling to find hope or some energy around optimism, like I think like meditation and mindfulness is really key in that regard. Like if you're like right now in this exact precise moment, is anything different than it would have been, if somebody else was in it? Like, we're not affected in this moment, right? Like everything is fine. We're breathing air. We're healthy. We get to do this thing. We get to have fun. The more you can kind of ground yourself in the present, I think that's the pathway towards, recognizing like a little sliver of beauty, hope, and optimism in life. And I would say, to kind of end this chapter, as podcast champion Ryan Holiday is fond of saying, it's just not that hard to not be an asshole.
Yeah, I love that. The more I see of him, the more I like.
There's a lot of assholery out there, and it's like, would it be that hard for you to not be that way? Right. And maybe we, can reflect upon that in terms of how we comport ourselves
in this era.
All right, Adam.
Yes, sir.
Did I mention that I had a psychedelic experience?
Wait, what?
I did.
I think I heard about it. It was on a podcast, and it was also, you did tell me a story once, just briefly. I want to hear more about it.
So I did share this publicly in the recent episode with Annika Harris. It felt right because that was a conversation around the nature of consciousness, which is my utter obsession and fascination these days.
Yes.
She did this incredible audio documentary called Lights On that everybody should listen to. It's really quite fabulous. And so she felt like the right person to kind of share that story publicly. But if you haven't listened to that episode, I'll tell a version of that here. And if you have, sorry, I'm going to tell the story again. But I will contextualize it by saying that so this was in December. I went to Mexico City for the purpose of taping this thing with Elmo.
Right.
So that all took place in Mexico City. It was with a brilliant ad agency called Flower Shop. There was a whole production crew. This was all part of their new Soft Winds campaign, with Elmo being kind of the ultimate avatar of softness, Can
I say, when you start out in the wilderness of podcasts where no one ever heard of a podcast, and then you end up in an on ad with Elmo, the only thing to do after that is a psychedelic. You're already living this.
I know. Well, that's why I'm telling this story, because the juxtaposition of these two things, in proximity to each other. Yeah. To be able to have when the opportunity arose, do you want to do this thing? I was I couldn't raise my hand fast enough. I was are you kidding me? That's a once in a lifetime, opportunity, experience to have. Who doesn't want to hang out with Elmo, just for a day or whatever? Yes. I only wish my kids were younger so that they would kind of appreciate it. I mean, not that they don't now. They thought it was funny, but it was a really cool thing.
They thought it was cute, but they would have been through the roof.
Yeah. And it was really fun. They rebuilt the podcast studio to a T in this warehouse. And, we shot for an entire day with a real director and a dolly and the whole thing. And Elmo it's fascinating. It's a whole nation state, Elmo. There's it takes 3 people to operate Elmo.
Oh, really?
And this one guy, Ryan, who does his voice, who's a brilliant improviser, really funny guy. There's a groomer, there's a stand that Elmo goes on, and there's there's an eye mask that goes over his eyeballs when he's not being, wow, when he's not on camera.
He's a real diva.
It's a whole thing. And it was just so much fun to do that.
You were acting. It wasn't even interviewing.
There was a script, and then we kind of would go through it, and then we would riff. But there was only one camera, so we had to do the wide and the reverse and the all the angles. So we were going through it a bunch of times. And I would say the best lines were the ones that Ryan kind of came up spontaneously on the spot. And so that was a super treat. But because we were in Mexico City, we have a friend of a friend who knew this medical doctor who specializes in these types of experiences. And so it was just a timing thing that we happened to be there, and this person happened to be available, that it seemed to line up for me to do this. Now, backing up, this is something I had thought about for a very long time, something that I've changed my mind about, and something that through the experience of hosting so many people on the podcast, became apparent to me that, I needed to kind of adopt the scientist mindset and be a little bit more curious about it, because if anything, I'm a 12-step indoctrinated person. You're sober or you're not. And when you tell someone like me that the answer to all your problems lies in a very powerful mind-altering drug, that's scary and dangerous, right? And something I had decided a long time ago with respect to psychedelics, not for me, I'm sure. And I would see and hear stories of many people whose lives had been benefited from this, but I just thought I'm going to have to find another path. But then it was the universe just kept I would have guest after guest after guest. And the purpose of these guests was not to come on and tell me about their psychedelic journeys. It would just come up ancillary to something else they were talking about. And so all of that's seeping into my mind. And, then Michael Pollan's book, and then his Netflix series, Like all these things kept happening, and it just became undeniable that this was worthy of deeper investigation. And, I've been in this process of trying to heal some, childhood trauma stuff and, make peace with my past and find a way to alleviate some of my unnecessary suffering and resentment and my challenges around like gratitude and like love and intimacy and all of these things. And I just thought like perhaps this is a tool that could be beneficial with that. So I decided to go forward with this and, had this incredible experience that was a combination of MDMA and psilocybin. It was like a 6-hour experience. And it really just was I would say the most profound single event experience in my life that over-delivered in every category of what I thought it would do. Like my expectations were very muted. I thought in my mind, because I'd never had any experience with psychedelics before. I thought maybe I'll have repressed memories will be unlocked, or I'll have some conversation with my young mother, or some way of healing, like like my connection with my past or something like that. And instead, it just kind of said, well, that's cute, and let me show you this instead. And my head exploded, and I entered the Tesseract, and time and space evaporated, and I was in this cycle of death and birth, and the complete dissolution of ego, and the complete breakdown of identity, and the barrier between self and everything else, and this sense of oneness that you can't describe in words, but I can't stop thinking about ever since.
Love is a word.
It's true. It's a word. It's a word, but what is it, Adam?
But that's what you felt, right?
Yeah, but it was also scary.
Yeah.
It took me like all the way to the edge of it's a flirtation with madness at times, I think. I went as far as I could go, and I had glimpses of wondering whether maybe I didn't wake up that morning and I was in some kind of afterlife, or perhaps I had imagined my life, but was in fact somebody like locked up in a padded cell living in my mind. You know what I mean? Like the whole time.
Yes. And you had blinders on, right?
So yeah, I had an eye mask on, and there was a soundtrack that was like, quite intense
taking
at times.
You there.
There was a bodywork piece to it that really kind of like in the sort of final third of the experience that like deepened it. And when I emerged out of it and finally I was so glad to be like back in a body. And I was in this person's home where it took place. And this person has like a big library of books, like hundreds and hundreds of books. And I'm looking at the books, as I'm kind of returning into my physical corpus, and realizing like book after book after book was written by somebody who had been on the podcast. Like, I know that guy, I know that person, I've read that book. And like, it was insane, like how much it tracked.
Yeah.
And then I thought, and I said this to Julie, I was like, I have this idea that I'm this podcaster out in the world, and I've read all these books, and I've met these people, and I know them. But I'm now starting to think maybe I've never left this room. And I'm looking at these books, and like verbal Klimt in what's that movie? The Usual Suspects, where he makes a whole, like, it's all a story.
He's taking it off the bulletin boards.
I've imagined that I've read all these books and talked to all these people, but I've actually never left this room. That's the kind of scary piece to it. But it was pretty expansive, and I'd been really exploring this idea of non-dualism in my meditation practice. This idea that consciousness is something that lives in your head. Like who you are is kind of like in here, right? Like between your ears, and disabusing you of that. Like that's just another appearance in consciousness, this sense or this feeling that you're in your head, because you actually have no head. Like that's sort of the non-dual like kind of notion, right?
There is
and it's such a difficult idea to get your head around. Like, what do you mean? Like, I am me, like you have your sense of self, right? And to try to inhabit any kind of connection with the idea that that is an illusion is almost an impossible leap. That this experience allowed me to get a taste of, that I've then taken back and incorporated into my meditation practice in a really profound way that has stayed with me. But I think the part of the reason I bring it up is because it gets to like notions of identity. Like, I am a 12-step person and I'm sober and I have this much time, and that time is important because it's a defining attribute of like who I am that comprises a part of my identity. And to have an experience like that is to kind of shatter your identity. But then when you piece it back together, you're like, what does that mean in the context of me being like a quote unquote sober person as part of a community that has a perspective on how you define sobriety? Like, do I reset my clock? Do I not? I voluntarily took a mind-altering substance, right? So under the, strict kind of like rubric of 12-step, I guess that means that I start my days over.
But you weren't a drug addict. But I think you were an alcohol. You were a drinker. Right?
You're like, but that doesn't. Like, doesn't matter. That doesn't mean I can be California sober. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? It's like mind-altering substances are like off the table. Like, and it's a very binary thing.
Okay.
But I think with this experience, like, and that was something that maybe even in the lead up to this experience was scary for me. Like, well, what will that mean about like, what happens when I go back to that community and I have to like be honest about that? Like, do I get shunned? Am I then looked at differently? And I think this experience, like having that like dissolution, that sort of ego death and dissolution of self, has put me in a place where it is like quelled the people-pleasing tendency in me. And it's like, I honestly don't care. Like, that's not my business. It's up to them. If other people think that should be the case, I'm totally fine with that. Like, their perspective or opinion is none of my business. And I actually feel like okay about that. Because I do feel good about having made that decision. I don't have any regrets, and it's quite the contrary.
That's cool. It's like, there are people using ayahuasca to get over like opiate addiction and things like that. And I don't know what the success rate on that stuff is, but like what you're bringing up is, when you fundamentally start to engage with your consciousness and your identity, you can leave a big experience like that. And it doesn't have to be a psychedelic experience. It could be some crazy near-death experience or whatever. You can shed a skin and come out of it. Not necessarily a wholly different human being, because you're not wholly different, but with a different perspective that can guide you subtly and but profoundly. Yeah. So it sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah. And it's not like something that I'm like clamoring to go do again right away,
Well, you did tell me you're going to introduce me to this doctor in Mexico.
Yeah, I will. I think I will do it again. I think I have more to learn there, but it's not. It didn't trigger that like addictive thing where there's like a craving.
No,
I think that's the difference.
I've it's been a long time since I went in the psychedelic into the psychedelia, and I've never done it in this clinical setting, which is this new way of doing it, right? Like this newer thing where it's like an accepted medicine that you can, which is what, oddly enough, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass were trying to do. They were like wanted to begin there. In the 50s, they were doing it in a lab, kind of more as a study, not as but there was a guiding component to it, I'm pretty sure. It's been a long time since I read about those studies, but it wasn't like they were feeding, they hadn't mastered the dose and they were messing with people to some degree to understand it. But it's funny that it's coming back into not the lab, but the clinical setting. So funny, peculiar, funny, good, like kind of an interesting return in a way.
I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there are, very real positive benefits from appropriate medically supervised use of certain compounds in certain contexts, whether it's PTSD or depression or addiction.
Yes.
But I also think it's important to say that, I'm not in a position to recommend this to anyone. And in fact, quite the contrary. I probably spent 5 or 6 years thinking about this before I did it. And I don't think it's for everybody. And I think that, you really need to do your research and be prepared if this is something I mean, it was so powerful. Yeah. I had no idea. Like it just completely, exploded, like a certain frame, that I'd always applied to the world. But it left me with a deepening of my fascination with the nature of consciousness itself. Like, I don't think there's anything more interesting than trying to understand the nature of consciousness. I think it's just an utterly fascinating rabbit hole to go down, because it conjures not only science, but philosophy and faith and the nature of reality and quantum physics and, all of these things. Like I told Annika, when I was in it, it felt like I was simultaneously in Interstellar and Inception at the same time. Like in Inception, you're going down, you're going down those levels, right? You keep going to a different level until you get to like the snow castle, right? Yes. And in Interstellar, you're in that tesseract where there are, an infinite number of realities that are available for you to kind of, like, every moment is an opportunity to enter, a different reality of yourself.
Yeah. But that is an amazing allegory for like the truth about every moment. It's true though, in small ways, not in big ways, but it's true. It's like, it is, we were talking about it yesterday, our neuroplasticity hardens after we're 25 years old. Maybe in some way these substances allow you to revisit the plastic nature of reality. You know what I mean? But in the ultimate, then you come back out and you're back grounded in the earth, and how do you then take it? Because I started experimenting with psychedelic drugs like any California college student would, dropping acid on college campus and then walking for miles to wherever you end up. But I came out of it with this intense experience of oneness, the very first time that has stayed with me, that has guided me. And I've had experiences of that without psychedelic drugs since then, but I don't think it would have been possible if I hadn't taken them originally and had that original experience. So I have had I remember I've had long versions that lasted a couple of days where I felt the oneness of the world like at my fingertips and was like riding a high. And I've had little moments where like someone was pouring water into a glass and it just like hit me like I was being poured into the glass. But I don't think that would have happened. This is years after taking psychedelic drugs. But I don't think it would have happened if not for the first time having that first big, it's like a Shaktipad almost in a way. It's like a Shaktipad experience.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing it.
Yeah, just like it just fractures everything, which is why it's hard. But then to me, the best experiences on that, your brain is basically fractured, like that tesseract, like you're talking about. And then all of a sudden, at the end of it, it kind of coalesces. And if it's a good experience for me, it always ends up in love. It always ends up in, I'm a pagan at heart, right? It always ends up in earth and love, like nature and love. So maybe we just need to dose this administration.
I think Elon is dosing himself.
That's true. He's overdosed.
The results of that are unclear, but I would say also like I still have this allergy to like, I think we both know a lot of people who like do too much of this stuff, right?
Yes.
And that becomes like all that pursuit of ego death and like disabusing yourself of the illusion of self creates a different self and a whole identity. Like you can craft a whole new identity around that.
You can have an addiction around that, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You're doing the work, the quote unquote work.
Right.
Okay, what does that mean? And I think that can be, I've seen it become problematic for people. And also like all the costuming around it. Yeah. You start wearing, long robes and, things like that. It's like, that's not me. I had one experience. It was profound. I'm sharing my experience. I'm not advocating for or against this. It turned out to be quite profound and beneficial for me. And that is not to say, once again, that this is something for everybody.
No. Well, I mean, the big story is Ram Dass, who is like in those early Timothy Leary experiments, and he thinks he's like found the secret to life, which is take this, right? I mean, you know the story better than me, but take this acid. This is gonna, you'll find the real nature of reality, and it'll guide you home. And then all of a sudden, he ends up in India and meets people who don't need the need the tab, right?
Well, when Bhagavan Das, leads him to Neem Karoli Baba, Bhagavan's the guy who, not for nothing, said, "Be here now," not Ram Dass. That's how it ended up. It's the title of his book. So when Richard Alpert, goes to India, when he gets booted out of Harvard and he's walking around trying to find, the meaning of life, he's out of options. He isn't meeting anyone. It's not working out. He's getting ready to pick up sticks and go home. And he encounters Bhagavan Das, who's like this kid from Southern California who was like a surfer guy who had the dreadlocks and is walking around India barefoot. And Bhagavan's like, "Come with me." And he takes him ultimately to, after they do this long walkabout, to Neem Karoli Baba. And Alpert, it was Neem Karoli Baba who gave Alpert the name Ram Dass. But Alpert, if I have the story correct, gave LSD to Neem Karoli Baba and said, "Check this out," and as the story goes, Neem Karoli Baba took it like a massive hero dose or whatever, and nothing happened because he's already enlightened. He's already inhabiting that higher state of consciousness.
Yeah. And that, when I first started practicing yoga, that's kind of when I stopped even playing in the psychedelic realm. I stopped. So it's kind of interesting how that works. And because ultimately you have to, it's good to know kind of the nature of yourself in reality, but ultimately you have to contend with it on its terms. So it's not a tool to use to deal with reality on a daily basis. It's like a scope that you have to then take what you can, and you just got to move forward and in strength. That's kind of how I always thought of it. Yeah.
I love coffee, but maybe not so much the jittery anxiety that it reliably delivers. So I would say that it was with a bit of mild suspicion that I greeted a test with Peak's new adaptogenic coffee alternative called Non-Dualism. What is Non-Dualism? Well, basically, it's a adaptogen concoction based upon fruiting body mushrooms and ceremonial grade cacao that I have to admit left me feeling pretty elevated after drinking, energized, yes, but also focused, calm, and steady pretty much all day, thanks to the lower caffeine, slow release incident to the fermented pu'er tea ingredient, and without the roller coaster ride typical of coffee. The Non-Dualism formulation is pretty insane. It includes triple toxin-screened fermented pu'er teas, mushrooms, of course, chaga, reishi, cordyceps, lion's mane, all of which are concentrated up to 20 times for potency. It's organic, vegan, and non-GMO. So if you're looking to adjust your morning ritual, now is a good time to try Non-Dualism. You can get 20% off plus a free starter kit when you visit peaklife.com/richroll. Meet Bragg, the original architects of whole food wellness. Their organic apple cider vinegar is a perfect example of thoughtful, clean nutrition. It's non-GMO, USDA, organic, produced in the USA with absolutely no additives or processed sugars. It's kind of like this perfect and versatile and super healthy addition to salad dressings and a wide variety of recipes for this tangy, nutritious boost. From the very beginnings of my personal adventures in nutrition and well-being 18 years ago, Bragg, I got to tell you, was the first brand I turned to. I actually talk about this in my book, Finding Ultra, which came out 13 years ago. And it's a brand that I've remained unwaveringly loyal to because their products are best in class, because of their insane commitment to quality, and not for nothing, because Bragg is a brand that's been doing things right for over 100 years. So check it out. Use promo code RICHROLL for 20% off your first order at bragg.com. Visit bragg.com to get your daily dose of wellness. All right. You want to talk about Adolescence?
Dude, first of all, I could barely sleep last night after watching one episode of Adolescence. Like, it is the most tense kind of like nervy show. I think it is brilliant. It is brilliant. I mean, you know so much about it, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. But like, you just turned me on to it yesterday, and I heard about it, and I knew it was good. The subject matter scared me because it was like, I have a 4.5-year-old, and this is about like troubled 13-year-old kid and like the worst trouble ever. And so I was kind of, I wasn't interested in like putting my brain there, and man, but it was quite an experience, and now I'm hooked. Yeah.
There is no other way to describe Adolescence other than just God tier television. It's unbelievable. And I will say that Roll-On is like, one of the main reasons I like Roll-On so much is it gives me this opportunity to like indulge, the audience with my, content streaming, TV and film takes,
secretly we've talked about this. Bro. Like, you go deep, this stuff so well.
Secretly, I want to just be hosting the podcast that I listen to the most, or there's two, is The Watch, and The Big Picture, which are both ringer shows about TV and film. I love those. Those guys are the best at it. But I think I secretly harbor this desire to host a film and television podcast. So maybe down the road. I love doing this. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. But the reason I want to focus on Adolescence today is not only because I think it's better than basically everything else out there at the moment, and it's the show that everyone's talking about. We got a lot of listener questions about it. It's mainly because the themes in this echo many of those that recur on this podcast.
Yes.
At this point, unless you're hiding under a rock, you've probably heard of this show or already watched it. I think we should do our best to not overly spoil it. You're like 2 episodes in. It's 4 episode. I've completed it. But for those that don't know, Adolescence is a Netflix limited series. It's a 4-episode exploration of this 13-year-old boy who's accused of having murdered a female classmate. It's utterly riveting. It's emotionally devastating. It is storytelling at the highest level of art and technical proficiency and social commentary. The character performance, the pathos, like there is not a false note in this entire thing. It's extraordinary. And it was co-created by Stephen Graham, who also is a co-writer and co-lead. He plays the dad.
Yeah, it takes place in England, like Birmingham or something like that, right?
Birmingham or Liverpool. I think Stephen Graham's from Liverpool, but not in London, right? Stephen Graham is a lauded character actor who's been around forever. He was in Gangs of New York, Band of Brothers, Peaky Blinders. He has this great story. I don't know if it's apocryphal about how he got his start, which was when Guy Ritchie was casting Snatch. And I think, as the story goes, like a buddy of his was auditioning and he accompanied his friend to this audition, where I think they were just auditioning like people in Liverpool or whatever, like average, normal people or like kind of less experienced actors. I might have that wrong. Anyway, Guy Ritchie looked at Stephen and said, "Are you the next audition? Are you auditioning next?" And he's like, No, I'm not here for that. And Guy Ritchie said, "I like your face though. Like, show up on Monday." And that's how he got his start.
He didn't even have to audition.
Like, yeah. He's also in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which shout out I think that might be my favorite all-time spy movie. Up there with one of my all-time favorites of the century, Michael Clayton.
I love Michael Clayton.
Which I watch like twice a year.
I love it.
It's just a masterclass in every regard. Also a movie with not a single false note.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, this is a little bit of an aside. If you're into kind of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, like tradecraft spy movies, this is the greatest time ever. If you're like dadcore about this like I am, there is so much incredible stuff out there, in this terrain. If you're into the CIA or the MI5 or the MI6, there's the agency. Remember when we talked about Le Bureau on the podcast, which was this French series about the DGSE, their intelligence service. Well, they remade it with Michael Fassbender.
Oh, right.
It's pretty.
That's what that is. That's what the agency is. Right.
It's pretty allegiant to the original series, but with a lot of money and like this incredible cast. And it's set in London in the London office of the CIA, and it's incredible. Like, and no one's talking about it.
No, well, that's the problem with. I mean, we'll get back to the show, but that's the problem with this overly contented era. There's just too much content.
There's so much out there. Like
right.
Michael Fassbender, one of the great actors of our time, is the lead in this extraordinary series right now, and I haven't heard anybody talk about it.
Nobody talks about it. Like, some stuff rises. Adolescence rises, White Lotus rises. It's kind of like akin to, it's partly because there's no rhythm to the TV schedule like there used to be, and partly because it's just like the streaming wars is like the aftermath of the streaming wars. But like, for instance, The Day of the Jackal, great novel is getting remade, right, as a television series.
Well, Eddie Redmayne, it already aired. It's unbelievable. It's so good. Eddie Redmayne is like, just going full bore in that series.
Kate Blanchett's in Black. I mean, Kate Blanchett's like the greatest actor alive or something, and she's in something.
we have so in the spy genre, the Agency. Then there's Black Doves on Netflix with Keira Knightley and Ben Whishaw, who played Q in Skyfall. He's like, Then there's Black Bag with Michael Fassbender and Kate Blanchett. Like Fassbender again, and this is a Steven Soderbergh movie that's out right now. Day of the Jackal, Slow Horses, Lioness. Even the bad ones like The Recruit and The Night Manager on Netflix, still like pretty good if you're like a dad like me. You know what I mean? Anyway, this is like a divergence away from Adolescence. Like, if you're into this, genre, like, it's a good time. Anyway, so Adolescence, Stephen Graham, co-creator, co-writer, Phil Barantini, director, who Graham had worked with. They did a movie called Boiling Point and a series called Boiling Point as well. And Jack Thorne, who's the co-creator and co-writer. And together, this sort of theater troupe of extraordinary talents, created something really special. And the conceit at the center of this is the one-shot format. Each episode is told in, each of the 4 episodes are told in 1 hour meticulously planned, single-take, continuous, one-take tracking shots, which are called oneers. So the camera never stops, right? And each episode is this really convention-defying, standalone piece of theater, a story within a broader story that slowly unveils like how this boy ended up in this place that, again, is executed flawlessly, no false performances, no false notes. And the oneer conceit, can go either way, I think. In many cases, I think it's misused because it's sort of show-offy, like, look at how cool I can be with the camera. But when it's integral to the themes and the characters and what the piece is trying to say, I think it can be masterful. Like, we think of the opening shot in The Player or the Copacabana scene in Goodfellas. Like, those are kind of very memorable, kind of oneers. But I think Adolescence is the best use case I've ever seen for this technique.
It's the most expanded. I mean, you've never seen this before.
It goes everywhere, and it does take you out of it at moments because you're like, how did they do that? When you want to stay rooted in the story, because there's a couple, like, they're going in windows and there's like, you're like, whoa, like, how did that happen? But I think it's masterful because at all times it's serving the characters and the narrative and the verite of all of it, because it's seeming to say that, like, life is really about the moments in between. And when the camera never leaves the characters, a lot of what you're seeing is in the in-between. And when you watch the first episode, you're like, can we speed this up? Like, can't we just get to the part where, and you're like, oh no, it's about like what happens in between when you're there and you end up in that other place. And also, it doesn't give you a break or the ability to look away from the really difficult moments that it's forcing you to confront. So the technical is really serving the narrative. And amazingly, from a technical perspective, they had, from what I understand, they had 1 day per episode to shoot. So 1 day to shoot an entire 1 hour episode. And they would have 10 chances to get it right. So they could go through it 10 times. And hopefully, because you have to go an entire hour without a mistake. You get to like almost the end and something screws up.
Right. Or they have various outs where they know like the characters are.
They could do a cut.
If you can say something wrong, or there must be a way. I'm not saying they cut. I'm saying there must be a way. I'm not saying they didn't get it 100% right to the page, but like there must be a way. Like if the camera went a little bit off where it's supposed to be, or the characters came out, maybe that ends up being the take they like, in a certain way, because it's more natural.
I'd be curious. I don't know the answer to this, but usually there's techniques where you can like swivel the camera such that
they could cut it.
You can do a cut in there and like mimic it so it looks like you didn't cut. And I would suspect there probably are a couple of those in there. I can't imagine they would go and maybe they did. I don't know.
But the rehearsal must have been incredible.
It is like theater. It is like theater. And it brings up, like I said, like a lot of themes that come up on this show. I mean, first and foremost, the relationship between teens and tweens and the internet. It does this masterful job of really elucidating the shadowy world of communication that young people engage with, that adults can't begin to understand, and the vast and destructive power of it that we kind of all underestimate. That Jonathan Haidt talked about on the podcast, and Scott Galloway is always talking about, and it also leaves you with questions but not answers. Like it doesn't really land on like, here's who's to blame, or it's this person's fault, or it's this institution that we should hold culpable. Kind of everyone's to blame, but no one single person is to blame for this set of circumstances that creates like this, tragic event.
It's interesting, like the phone is ever present in the school episode. You see it, and you see the tension between the adults. I mean, there's a little cynicism in the public school representation that these kids go, that they exist in. I think it's probably a version of reality, but I couldn't stop thinking about the anxious generation when I was watching it. It's like it's right there. And the one thing that the anxious generation it talks about, I'm not criticizing, because I think it's a groundbreaking piece of work. I think it should win to me, it's like one of the great gifts from the academia to the pop culture era. One of those books that is seminal. But because of the way the evidence works, the data is more there for what it's doing to young girls, and he definitely talks about the impact on young men. But if you read the book closely, the data doesn't pile up to show young men are having the same level of consequences as young girls when it comes to teen suicide and things like that. And this, even though the young girl dies in this, so obviously she suffers the most, but I think what the takeaway here is young men and the struggles of young men. And so there are people out there talking about Galloway's talking about this a lot. So not to, there are people out there doing that, but to me, it just shows it's like Jonathan Haidt meets Galloway in terms of where the focus should be of society's ills. This is the place we should be looking.
And not for nothing, they're both professors at the same university at NYU. I mean, they're colleagues, right? But I think you're absolutely right. This is at the core of Adolescence is something to say about the vulnerability of young men. And when you look at violence, addiction, self-harm, all of these things have escalated precipitously for this cohort of people. And when you look at the statistics, it's pretty crazy. I mean, 7 out of 10 high school valedictorians are girls. Girls are graduating college at twice the rate of boys. Young men are 3 times more likely to overdose, 4 times more likely to commit suicide, 14 times more likely to be incarcerated than young women. And not surprisingly, 98% of all mass shooters are male. And this is not to say that we shouldn't be celebrating the advances of young women. Like, this is a fantastic thing. But clearly, there's something going on with young men in which they're suffering in a profound way. And there's plenty of root causes for that. And you could spend hours kind of parsing all of that. But I think what Adolescence does so beautifully is it doesn't point its finger at any one thing. It's basically saying everything is contributory to this. And, when you mentioned the school, like the teachers are like, I'm a zookeeper, like it's chaos, right?
It's chaos.
So there's the institutions, there's the educational institution, there's the judicial institution, there's the mental health therapeutic institution, and there's the family institution. Like, what is the role that parents play? And there's an episode that's kind of really all about that, which seems to say some version of like, it's not all your fault, but you're not off the hook either. And, could you have done this better? Or could you have done that better? Sort of like, these parents are not bad parents. They're good parents who did the best that they could. They overlook certain things, and in the aftermath are kind of looking back in the rearview mirror and say, should we have done that? Should we have done this? But I'm so much, like my dad did this to me and I didn't do that. Like we're all better than, what preceded us, but what's right in front of us that we're overlooking. And what's in front of us that we're overlooking is those in-between moments, right? It's like being passive in the midst of like the person who's scrolling right in front of you and not knowing what they're actually looking at, and making that decision to like not engage with like the reality of what's occurring before your very eyes.
Right. Well, we are in some ways more advanced in terms of how we handle emotion and things with our kids than our parents were. I mean, this is a vast generalization, but in some ways. But what's different is the landscape is completely like a funhouse mirror. And so like the laws of physics don't apply because there's this other world that we don't understand, and there's rooms in it we don't go. And so we can have more tools and be psychologically and emotionally more equipped to handle. And not all of us are, but we can be, and still strike out in places. And because that's just human nature, and that's probably true anyway, but it's especially true now in this when there's a fourth dimension.
Yeah, and in that dimension, the fluency in, kind of emoji encryption and what those things mean that speak to bullying and the manosphere and incel culture, like all of these things are sort of, probed in this series from the perspective of adults that have no understanding of it, yet is so much a part of these young people's lives and how they kind of make sense of the world and what drives their behavior.
And we say they, but like we are they. We were that. And I remember how lonely it was. Like even a good childhood in adolescence is very lonely at times. Like
but it's it's qualitatively different now when everybody has a phone in their pocket where everybody's talking about everybody else.
Right.
And they're doing it in that mean-spirited way that only adolescents can.
Right. Well, I guess what I was trying to say is that we carry a level of shame in adolescence. Like one of the beautiful things about being with a kid Zuma's age is the self-awareness and shame isn't there yet. And so you can see the purity, but the shame's going to come. And in adolescence, like pre-adolescence and adolescence, it really peaks because it comes in tidal waves, and you don't know how to manage it, and you don't have the tools, and you don't want anyone to know how you really feel, even your friends or your parents. So that's what I meant by loneliness, and that was true, I think, when we were growing up. But it's worse, like you're saying, it's worse. The ramifications are worse.
Steroids,
yeah,
right? We're running this mass experiment, and it's happening, it's happening in our homes. Like the idea that's sort of advanced, you're not there yet. This kind of comes up in the fourth episode with the parents, kind of reflecting on this and doing an inventory on their own parenting and thinking like we did a good job, right? Like, didn't we, like we got him a computer when he wanted it. And because he was home thinking like he's safe, right? But not really understanding what's happening in that room. But because he was under the roof, like everything is cool,
right.
And realizing like, oh, that's not the case. And this gap between thinking what's going on. Like the sort of interior lives of teenagers will always remain a mystery. But to the extent that like there is something to be said for the communication and the involvement of the parent in whatever that kind of discourse is that's going on, that is creating and driving so many of these unfortunate mental health and at times violent outcomes.
It makes me really happy to see the new pod on the Voicing Change Network. Ask Lisa.
Ask Lisa.
Yeah.
Like I texted her and I said, please do an entire episode devoted to adolescence. Like this is like, I've never seen anything more up her alley to discuss. And the fact that this is like the #1 show on Netflix, and in the UK, I mean, it's huge here, but in the UK, it's massive right now. And it's already having a kind of impact that Jonathan Haidt's book had here, right? In terms of like driving change. So like even Starmer, the prime minister, is calling for screenings in parliament and schools. Thorne, the co-creator, is calling for a digital age of consent to ban smartphones under 16. Like there's a lot of kind of things that are actually happening downstream. And that's the power of art, right? Like this is art at the highest level. Yeah. It's something that has something to say that is very timely and of the moment. And whether you're a parent or not, you probably have contact with some young people who are struggling in some regard from some version of the malaise that these young people are experiencing and is demonstrated in this show.
Yeah,
it's heavy shit, man.
Heavy.
But it's so well done. Like it's absolutely captivating. Episode 3, which you haven't got to yet, and which I'm not going to spoil, is probably one of the finest hours of television I've ever seen. It is pure theater and acting excellence. And I was astonished to learn that Owen Cooper, who plays the 13-year-old boy, not only was this show his first acting job, that episode 3 was the first one that they shot, which is essentially him in a room with somebody else talking the entire time. And it is absolutely riveting. And the range that this kid shows in his acting skills, I mean, you're seeing like the next Leonardo DiCaprio. Like this kid is gifted. His first acting job on the first day of the first episode of this thing, and he absolutely like hits it out of the park. It's unreal.
Unbelievable.
Fear, innocence, rage, power, misogyny. I mean, the other piece here is the misogyny. Right. And there's a lot to be said about the perspective of the women in this show. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but whether it's mother to daughter or this therapist in episode 3 that has to engage with not only this kid, but also another worker in this mental health institute, observing the dynamic between that other employee and this therapist. Like it has so much to say without saying anything about what women have to experience every single day that plays into the behavior of this kid. It's just, I'm obsessed, dude. It's so good. There's so also a great video on YouTube on the making of the show. I'll link that up in the show notes. But it's pretty cool. And I think it's only like, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes or something like that. It's great.
Thank you for turning me on to it and ruining my next week of sleep because I can't sleep after watching this.
But listen, like, you will be better for it. Zuma, this is the time. Like, my youngest is 17. Like I see this played out, and all the parents who have young people who are in the same age bracket, like you're so lucky that you're getting schooled on all of this stuff in advance.
We're not in the petri dish. We have a chance to escape the petri dish.
You do.
Yeah, we have a chance.
And it's going to be work. It's going to be work.
Well, one thing is April really is into Waldorf education, and I'm seeing it up close. I'm into it too. It just happens to agree with Zuma's sensibility. So it's like a nice mix, and there's no like. In some public schools, you're still getting an iPad for kids in like first grade or something. Like Waldorf, there's nothing like that. And so hopefully we have a chance. There's going to be some bumps and bruises. I mean, I told April about Adolescence and we watched the trailer. She goes, I am not in on that. She's like, she wants to watch Megan make tacos for her girlfriends in Mendocino. That's what she wants to watch. And you know what?
We could do a whole podcast on that TV show alone.
That's not a bad TV show. not a bad TV show. That's where she's at. Before.
I understand that.
Yeah, me too.
Julie doesn't want to watch Adolescence for different reasons.
Right.
Like, it's traumatizing to watch. It's not a light thing.
No. And my own media diet has been, White Lotus is like the first series in a while we got into again, because like I was back into like High Maintenance, which is, I love High Maintenance. To me, it's one of my favorite television shows ever. On, it came out years ago. It's like the weed dealer on his bicycle, and he goes and you get slices of life in Brooklyn. This was I think it came out like 2010 or something like that. I forget exactly. Maybe it was more recent than that, but and I love that show. So I was watching that and just watching the Lakers and watching, The Americas came out, a great nature doc that Tom Hanks is narrating. Like, that's the media diet at our house. And then Adolescence, it's like a different experience, but it's like so visceral. I'm into it. I'm into it.
Well, the takeaways are not only is it a must watch for parents or anyone who's a caretaker of young people, I really think it's something that everybody should see, especially anyone who has the opportunity, who's not a parent, to get involved in the life of a young person. Like, a lot of it is about the lack of strong role models, and to the extent that it might motivate you to become a role model of a young person in your life, that would be a net positive for society as well.
Yes.
I also think I found it personally to be an incredible conversation starter with my kids. Like, I had a long talk with Mathis, our 21-year-old, about it. Like, she was onto it even before me, watched the whole thing. We got to talk about this. Like, and I was saying to her, like, this is a lens into like what, into a world that you understand that most, older people don't. Like, what is how accurate is it? Like, what is this like? Do you feel like, this is really giving voice to something that you've kind of always understood to be the case? And it was like we had this amazing conversation about it. So I think it's great connective tissue as a topic of conversation with like the young people in your life.
Interesting, and like the Ask Lisa podcast, perfect time for it. Like, people need this stuff. My friend Adam Dodge has that tech savvy parent kind of business where he's trying to educate people on what's happening to their kids in this world. Ask Lisa is kind of helping, like to be able to have a resource, like a Love Line was a resource, but a resource for parents, a place to go to ask questions. That's why I'm excited for that podcast on the network, because it's important. Like,
and she's the best at it.
Yeah, and
she's so good.
We need it, man. We need it because we are in the dark, and that it's almost like it's shame transference in a way. It's like the adolescent is feeling this heavy dose of shame because it's kind of nature, but also the world, or the way we structure things. And then the parent kind of gets it by osmosis because, like, yes, some parents are honest with their other parents about problems, but sometimes we're not, like sometimes we want to keep, because we don't want to expose, this is what's happening with our kid, not necessarily for judgment, but we don't want the kid to be judged. And so it's like this weird swirl of judgment where there's just not a lot of transparency. And so, this podcast can help a lot of people. Yeah.
No doubt about it. What else you want to talk about?
Oh, well, White Lotus. I love White Lotus is a good time.
It definitely is an indulgence.
If you want a cocktail and kick it by the pool and make fun of wealthy people.
You could just feel superior watching all these horrible people behave badly,
Hey, I'm enjoying it. I miss. For those who don't know, I spent a lot of time in Thailand. I covered Thailand for Lonely Planet for many different parts of it. I've driven up the coast from Malaysia to Burma and back. I've lived in Phuket for periods of time. I've been in Bangkok many times. So watching this, I've got friends there. It's like, makes me want to go back, makes me I love it there so much. I lived in Mae Sot on the Burma border for a period of time. So it's fun for me. Like, I know that some people, like the chat was that season 3 is kind of not as good as 1 and 2, but that's not my experience. I love it as much, partly because of the location and partly because, look, I mean, that Sam Rockwell, if you haven't seen it,
that was all
5,
time.
That's maybe the best monologue of all time,
incredible.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to love. I'm not bagging on it. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think this season is a little bit different because when you take Jennifer Coolidge out of the equation, you're not going to get a lot of that type of humor. You can't replace her, right? So the tone of the humor shifts a little bit. And I think just from a structural perspective, it's been a slower build towards like the chaos that is kind of around the corner.
You make a good point. Because
so every episode, it was like, well, these characters are kind of in the same place they were last week, having the same conversation. And it's, you're inching towards something happening, but I sort of got progressively a little like, let's just get on with it. Like we've already seen a version of this conversation already. Why are we doing it again? And it's the volume's slowly getting turned up. And like Mike White is a genius. I trust him. Like he's earned my trust time and time again. He knows he is so masterful as like a satirist of, kind of culture. Like, dude, it's amazing. And all of these people, I think one of the reasons why it's so good is the characters that he writes, like, we probably all like know people who kind of fit them, right? So there's a relatability, like, oh, I know that person. I know that I know who that, I know exactly who that guy is or whatever. And so we have experiences with those people. And so we create this like parasocial relationship with these various characters. And, we want to see the whole thing implode,
But he's so good. Like his dialogue on Buddhism, like the stuff he can speak so intelligently about Buddhism. He can nail every bit of corniness, the corniness of the expat in Thailand, the corniness of the rich family from North Carolina, his eye for detail on how insipid like humanity can be is remarkable, and his dialogue is just incredible. And it's funny, when I was reporting on the Burma story with the displaced people in Karen State on the Burma side of the Burma border of Thailand. At one point, I had a meeting with one of the main guys in charge of delivering aid to all the different aid organizations. Basically, USAID, which has gotten in the news lately, was giving money to this organization, and was like, it was in the millions and tens of millions of dollars was this budget, and going out to different areas to service these refugee camps and displaced people. And I end up sitting down. He knows I'm there. I was there for Men's Health. And he knows I'm there as a journalist. And it just goes into this weird kind of, it wasn't Sam Rockwell, but it was in the ballpark of his like sexual deviancy in Thailand and who he was with, and I'd met him in different social occasions a couple times prior to that. But he just like opened the curtain on the guy he really was. And, I never forgot that. It was so wild. And so like everything you see is just like obviously turned up to 10, but like it's there, this is
it's true that people go there for that reason, right? I mean, the first joke that I laughed out loud at this season was when the joke about like he's the bald guy, all the bald guys who are like
Yes.
And the performances are great. And I think the fact that he chose to set it in Thailand allows him to ask bigger questions this season. Like,
more spiritual.
It's identity, right? Like the whole Sam Rockwell thing is like, what is identity? Who am I? Or whatever. And I think all the characters are asking themselves some version of that. Like, here I am in my life, and like, who do I want to be? Who am I? And to what extent does this identity that I have like hold me prisoner or hold me back from who I could be?
And how about Sam Rockwell, the roles he chooses? Like, I don't know how, I would love to just hear him talk about how he ends up like in Jojo Rabbit as like the reluctant Nazi, or in Three Billboards, or like in this role. Like, you know what I mean? It's he picks the most interesting, and then he shows up, and it always takes me like 30 seconds to figure out who he is. I've seen him a million, but you know what I mean? Like I knew wait, who's that? What's his name again? I always forget his name because he's the character to me.
But in the case of White Lotus, he's married to Leslie Bibb.
I know.
It's sort of like we could have seen that coming, I guess.
And he's buddies with Walter Goggins.
Oh, are they? Like, you could see those guys hanging out, like partying together.
Yeah. How great's Walter Goggins?
I know. Walton. Yeah. Amazing.
Amazing.
As always. Yeah. I mean,
Walton. Sorry, Walton.
He's he's quite something, that actor.
Yeah.
On Monday, a podcast will go up between me and Maria Shriver.
Oh.
Which we recorded a while ago. We recorded it I think a day or two before the season premiere of White Lotus. So no episode had gone up yet, but her son is Patrick Schwarzenegger, who, plays a pretty indelible character in the show. And I got to say, is crushing it. You know, I think he's doing like an unbelievable job. Like, he has taken this opportunity and like turned it up to 11.
100%. And he's his own actor. There's no, you know what it reminds me of?
But he is, like, I heard Bill Simmons talking about this, like, there is a charisma that you're going to have when Arnold Schwarzenegger is your dad and you're part Kennedy,
true.
And he's able to like carry that swagger pretty well, but also make it his own. Like, he's doing protein shakes and getting buffed up, but he's not like trying to be his dad. Like, he is his own thing.
He's almost like, God, why am I spacing on this major actor? He did, Bradley Cooper. He's got some, it's a deeper experience. It's a deeper show and a deeper character, but like, it's kind of like that Bradley Cooper and Wedding Crashers character for him. And look what happened to Bradley Cooper. Like,
he crushed it in Wedding Crashers, and then, he really made the most of that opportunity and turned it into a career. Or the first time that you saw Brad Pitt on screen in Thelma and Louise.
Well, but he was likable. But like, here's an unlikable.
But he's likable in his unlikability.
But he's so charismatic. I mean, if you haven't seen that, go watch the Brad Pitt, Gina Davis scene in Thelma and Louise. That's an all-timer.
As soon as you see that, you're like, wow, that guy's going to be a movie star. Like, you just know it immediately, right?
Yes.
Anyway, kudos, Patrick Schwarzenegger, for crushing it.
Yes.
We got to get out of here. But I will say a couple quick things before we end. I got a question about the telepathy tapes.
Okay.
Have I told you about this? This was a astronomically successful podcast series.
Yes. I've heard of it.
It's planted Rogan for a while. It was like the #1 podcast. And it's all about these nonverbal autistic people who quite possibly have telepathic powers. Like, this is wild. Like, this is the craziest, most engaging podcast series I've listened to in a long time. Like, it is really a great listen. It's fascinating. Whether or not there's truth to it or not, like, who knows? It goes to the nature of consciousness and all these sorts of things that I'm interested in. But I had Kai Dickens on the podcast, so that episode is coming up.
Cool.
It's gonna air April 28th. We had a great conversation because a question came up from the listeners about the telepathy tape. So trust me, I'm on it.
I've heard amazing things.
And I think that's it.
There was one question. There was one audience question you didn't get to: is how to get unstuck if you feel stuck, or when you feel stuck.
Mood follows action.
Do something.
Yeah, if you're stuck, you have to do a pattern interrupt. You have to do something. And when you feel stuck, you don't feel like doing anything different. But the only way to get unstuck is to, upset the balance. And the way you upset the balance is by taking a contrary action. And when you don't feel like taking a contrary action, you have to remind yourself that mood follows action, and that you have to develop the reflex to act in spite of your resistance or emotional baggage around it. And the unstuckness is a byproduct of the action, not the other way around. So I think it's identifying one small thing that you can do that perhaps isn't so intimidating that you're going to resist it forever, and is just doable enough to get you over the hump. Because the unstuckness only, gets unstuck by doing something that will unstick you. You know what I mean? What do you do?
This is a Dr. Seuss. This is turning into a Dr. Seuss book. No, but you know what? It's true. It's like, for me, it's a mental game first, right? Like being stuck is a state of mind before it's your reality. And so changing up the routine, I guess, is hard when you feel stuck. But if you just do one thing, you know what I did once when I was feeling kind of like lost and stuck, is I decided to jump in the ocean every morning, rain, whatever. And I think it started like in the new year, like January 1. And so it was like cold water though I was looking for. And this was before I was ocean swimming or anything on a regular basis. And so I would walk from my apartment in Santa Monica to go jump in the ocean. I was like trying to make it as a writer. It wasn't going well. It was like I was staring at my eviction notice phase. And that kind of started. I mean, next thing you know, I'm an ocean swimmer. So that's a great example of exactly what you're talking about. Just do something.
It's a pattern interrupt.
Right.
You took a contrary action.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just the idea of being stuck is you said it starts as a mental construct, but it's basically a story. Like, what does that even mean, right? It's something you're telling yourself and affirming as true. But is it even true? Like, can you deconstruct that story? What is the evidence to support you being stuck? And perhaps there's another story that you can tell that begins with, taking an action that somebody who isn't stuck would take.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. It's interesting because we didn't talk about it, but Bonnie Choi's new book coming out.
On Muscle.
On Muscle. It's her follow-up to Why We Swim.
Another champion of the pod.
Another champion. You should lift it up, show the people this thing. I think it's her best book so far.
I haven't read it yet. I can tell you have. It's dog-eared.
Yes. It's as in true Bonnie fashion, it's a deep dive into a subject matter. In this case, it's muscle and the physical body. And it's also a memoir about her relationship with her father, who was kind of a great athlete. He was an early bodybuilder and a great artist. And then her parents separated and her relationship became distant, and it's about all of that. Because Bonnie is a tremendous athlete herself, great swimmer, great surfer, and you can read through how she became a great athlete. It's obvious, and her brother is also athletic. But then it deep dives into different characters, different protagonists dealing with muscle or their body in some way. There's a paraplegic yoga instructor she spends a lot of time with. She spends a lot of time with the guy who, the guy that jumps into Lake Michigan, does flips in Chicago into Lake Michigan. That guy who became like internet famous, and she spent the same exact deal, pattern interrupt during the pandemic, and now his job basically is to jump into Lake Michigan. He's got fans everywhere. But to me, it's like, in terms of, I liked Why We Swim a lot. So this is not to put down any other book. So that's a good book. But this, I think, is her best work so far.
All right. On Muscle.
And it comes out this month.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Shout out, Bonnie.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we did roll on. Did we do it?
We did it.
Do you feel good?
We did it. I
feel good about it.
I'm just happy to be here. Like, I don't need to know when the next one is.
Sooner rather than later, most likely. We'll see. We'll see how this one goes.
We'll see how it plays.
Who knows? Back to uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be here. It's good to be in the new space. It's exciting times. So 2025 has been a long run, but there's good stuff coming this year.
Right. Yeah. Given the decade of experience that we've had in the last, couple months, it might be 20 years before we do another roll-on.
Yeah,
at this
point.
In
2 weeks.
All right.
All right, man.
See you soon. Peace. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed the conversation. To learn more about today's guest, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at richroll.com, where you can find the entire podcast archive, as well as podcast merch, my books, Finding Ultra, Voicing Change in the Plant Power Way, as well as the Plant Power Meal Planner at meals.richroll.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and/or comment. Supporting the sponsors who support the show is also important and appreciated, and sharing the show or your favorite episode with friends or on social media is, of course, awesome and very helpful. And finally, for podcast updates, special offers on books, the meal planner, and other subjects, please subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find on the footer of any page at richroll.com. Today's show was produced and engineered by Jason Camiolo, with additional audio engineering by Cale Curtis. The video edition of the podcast was created by Blake Curtis, with with assistance by our creative director, Dan Drake. Portraits by Davey Greenberg. Graphic and social media assets courtesy of Daniel Solis. Thank you, Georgia Whaley, for copywriting and website management. And of course, our theme music was created by Tyler Pyatt, Trapper Pyatt, and Harry Mathis. Appreciate the love the support. See you back here soon. Peace. Plants.